Okay, quick video. So one of the reasons why I'm so fascinated by this topic of discussing the ethical implications of creating people, of reproduction, is the fact that it does seem to be this very heavily overlooked, this substantial blind spot that many people have when discussing ethics. Because you can't really discuss ethics without at least considering. You can't ask questions like, how do we best go about treating the unfairness of life without making things worse? Like, how do we best go about minimizing severe, purposeless suffering without at least considering, what does it mean to create a human being? What does it mean to bring about the gradual development of a human being that will gradually develop a capacity to suffer far more severely than you can even come close to grasping, to conceptualizing? It's far beyond what we can understand. And that's the truth. That is what you are doing when you are creating a human being. And many people, if you look around, many people don't even ask the question as to what it means to do that. They don't give any real thought to what it is that their children, who will eventually, ideally, right, from their perspective, grow up to be adult human beings that will have to endure, that will have to suffer with all kinds of shit. They don't even think about the future suffering of their children. And this will heavily determine, it will be reflected in the way in which they'll conduct themselves in the world, how many children they might have, who they might have children with, without even thinking about these things. Like, what will be the future outcomes? They won't even consider. And I feel that more people should, really, really should. What does it mean to again, what does it mean to impose, to force upon the very real risk of hell, of suffering that is far beyond your grasp? What does it mean to do that? And it's not a coincidence that the people who are the least fit to do that, to create a person and take it about themselves, to assist in the molding process of this person into what will eventually be an adult, it isn't a coincidence that people who are far more likely to do this are going to be far less likely to consider these things. Because of course the people with brains in their fucking skulls are going to at least think about it. What does it mean to do that? They're going to consider the risks, at least to some degree, at least in a very distant, abstract sense. They'll at least think about it. Whereas the people who won't, they're going to be far more likely to do it without even giving it a second goddamn thought. And again, not too long ago, I made a video giving the devil his due and discussing religion and all the positive qualities, the potential for good that exists in religious belief in the modern day. There's so much shit. There's so much bad fucking shit that comes along with much of religious belief. And that's a large portion of it. Believing that everything happens for a goddamn reason. Believing that their decisions, their actions in the world, that a God is going to be protecting them and protecting their children at least from unnecessary severe harm. It's going to, at least their children will suffer, but it will have a purpose. There will be a purpose behind the torture. And there's good reason to believe that in many, many cases, this is not the way that it is. God is not protecting you. God will not be protecting your child. You have to at least consider the possibility that God, if he's a thing, if he exists, he doesn't give a shit about you or your child. There's a good chance of this, at the very least. If there is any sort of being that brought us into being, there's a very good chance that he does not give a shit. And it's at least good to consider this, like, at least again in a distant sense, because there's a good chance that as you age, that possibility will become more visible. It'll become easier to see that as a very real possibility, that there is no God, or maybe he doesn't care. That might be because there's just so much suffering on this planet that doesn't seem to have a rhyme or a reason behind it. It doesn't. There's so much of it that's it's just random. It's just senseless. Point is, when you are creating a person, you are imposing the very real risk of hell, of torture. And the people who have little to no respect for that, the people who aren't able to grasp it, or if they are, they don't care about the suffering that their potential child, their future child will have to face in their lives, if they just don't care, they're going to be far more likely to create people. This is the way that it is. And this thoughtlessness, this carelessness, of course, the reasons behind this, very multifaceted. It's not black and white, not even close. But you have to at least consider that. That's a large portion. If we're going to discuss ethics, if we're going to discuss how to go about making life less horrific for as many people as we can, we have to be able to consider that. Like in the previous video, like what does it mean to do that? Because when you consider that, what it means to impose the very real risk of hell, of severe suffering that is far beyond what you can grasp, it becomes clear that maybe abortion, in very many cases, is the better alternative. Again, even if you believe it to be wrong, it's still, you see the alternative. In many cases, they live lives that I would not want to live. That, I can at least say that many embryos that would have been terminated, who were conceived by a couple of fucking airheads in many goddamn cases, people who are before the age of 23, don't know what the fuck they're doing, and they've conceived, and instead of terminating the embryo, they'll see that as being more harsh. That's cruel. That's murder. So they'll feel as though the alternative, the other thing, bringing that conception to term, allowing it to gradually develop, again, a capacity to suffer that is far beyond what they can grasp, that will be, by default, the better alternative. And again, more people should at the very fucking least consider that might not be the case in many, many cases. Even if you believe abortion is wrong, you have to at least be able to consider that the alternative, if you look at, again, the entirety of so many lives, the entirety of so many fucking lives on this planet, what do they consist of? You have a large handful of orgasms, that's and then tons of suffering thrown in, lots and lots and lots of it, and then they die. And what took place there in between that? What sort of thoughts did they have? What sort of impacts did they? It's just. But yeah, I can honestly say, at the very least, I strongly feel, I believe that rather than live many, many of those lives, I would have rather been terminated as an embryo. At the very least, rather than carry out many, many lives that have been carried out on this planet. I don't think that's too fucked up of a thing to say, and I don't say it lightly. I try not to say it lightly, at least. I would not want to carry out the majority of those lives, potentially the vast majority of when you attempt to deeply consider the alternative, what the full picture of that looks like, and I would pass. That's all I'm